If a president declares victory, but the other side also sees it as its own victory, then who is really controlling the situation? That is the question forcing Washington to move carefully. U.S. intelligence agencies are assessing how Iran may respond if President Donald Trump unilaterally declares victory after roughly 2 months of war. The issue is not a political slogan, it is a strategic signal. If the United States reduces its forces, Tehran may claim that it forced Washington to de-escalate. But if the United States keeps a large military presence in the region, Iran may see the declaration as nothing more than negotiating pressure, not the real end of the war. According to Reuters Ipsos data cited in the original source, only 26% of Americans believe the campaign is worth the cost, and only 25% believe it has made the United States safer.
In this situation, victory is not a statement. It is a test of willpower, cost, and the ability to control the pace of escalation. To understand why a declaration of victory could become a risk, we have to look at the foundation of the crisis. This was not a confrontation that erupted overnight. The United States and Iran have been trapped for years in a cycle of nuclear disputes, sanctions, ballistic missiles, proxy networks, and control over strategic maritime routes in the Middle East. At the center is the Strait of Hormuz, the energy choke point through which roughly 20% of the world's crude oil passes. When Iran attacks vessels and lays mines, it is not merely harassing maritime traffic. It is a form of selective blockade designed to turn military pressure into economic leverage.
According to CBS News, Hormuz has become a central issue in Washington's ultimatum to Tehran. The Guardian also reported that Iran wanted to prioritize an agreement to reopen the strait first before discussing nuclear issues, missiles, and sanctions. That is how Tehran breaks the chessboard into smaller pieces. Iran understands that the United States has superior firepower, but the White House still has to calculate gasoline prices, inflation, and the 2026 midterm elections. So the battlefield is not only in the Persian Gulf, it is spread across 3 fronts: the negotiating table, the oil route through Hormuz, and the political endurance of Washington.
The center of this crisis comes down to one key question. If President Trump declares victory, will Iran see it as a sign that the war is over or as proof that Washington is looking for a way out? According to the Reuters data provided, U.S. intelligence agencies are assessing this exact scenario at the request of senior officials in the administration. That shows Washington understands something very clearly. In a war of attrition, victory is not measured only by the number of targets destroyed. It is measured by which side controls the interpretation of the final outcome. If the White House declares victory and then reduces its military presence in the region, Tehran may turn that move into a political win. Iran could argue that it survived the bombing campaign, preserved its core capabilities, and forced the United States to de-escalate.
On the other hand, if the United States maintains a large force posture in the Middle East, the message will be different. Iran may then view the declaration of victory as a media maneuver designed to reduce domestic pressure, while Washington keeps military leverage to force negotiations. Iran's strength lies in asymmetric warfare. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a shipping route. It is a tool of economic coercion. Attacking ships, laying mines, and destabilizing oil transport routes allow Tehran to extend the impact of the battlefield into the global energy market. According to The Guardian, Iran once wanted to prioritize an agreement to reopen Hormuz first, while leaving nuclear issues, missiles, and sanctions for later. That is how Tehran separates the urgent economic problem from Washington's long-term strategic objective.
For the United States, the advantage lies in long-range strike capability, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, naval power, and an integrated chain of command. But firepower superiority does not automatically create political superiority. A campaign can hit many targets and still fail to force the opponent to accept defeat. That is why Hormuz has become so critical. If Iran lifts the blockade, energy prices may cool down, and the White House will have a basis to claim that military pressure worked. But if the price is a U.S. force reduction while the nuclear file remains unresolved, then victory becomes extremely difficult to define. At the tactical level, U.S. military options are still on the table, including the possibility of renewed strikes against Iranian military and political targets.
However, according to the data provided, Iran used the ceasefire period to recover launchers, ammunition, drones, and equipment that had been buried after U.S. and Israeli airstrikes. That makes every new round of escalation more expensive. Iran does not need to defeat the United States in the traditional sense. It only needs to survive, maintain leverage over Hormuz, prolong the rhythm of the crisis, and make every day of war more costly, economically and politically. That is the nature of this confrontation. One side has superior firepower, the other side has geography, time, and the ability to disrupt. In that situation, declaring victory is not the end of the story. It may only be the opening act of a far more dangerous bargain.
But every exit has a price. For Washington, declaring victory may reduce domestic political pressure. But on the ground, if the United States de-escalates too quickly, Tehran may interpret that not as goodwill, but as a sign that Washington has reached its limit. The first risk is Iran's recovery capacity. According to Reuters, a rapid de-escalation deal could leave behind an emboldened Iran, giving Tehran more time to rebuild its missile and nuclear programs while continuing to pressure U.S. allies in the region. This is not immediate risk, it is a strategic risk. The United States could end the campaign in words, while Iran quietly begins a new cycle of rearmament.
The second risk is military. A ceasefire does not only create breathing space for diplomacy, it also creates breathing space for redeployment, dispersion of equipment, and the recovery of combat capability. Reuters reported that Iran used this time to dig out launchers, ammunition, UAVs, and other assets buried after U.S. and Israeli airstrikes. That means if the campaign resumes, the United States may face a harder target set, forces dispersed deeper, ammunition depots concealed more effectively, and missile-launched networks that are much harder to destroy. In real military operations, time is always a resource. If it is not controlled through reconnaissance, blockade, and continuous pressure, time becomes an advantage for the enemy.
Military options remain on the table. Limited airstrikes against missile launchers, UAV depots, air defense sites, command and control facilities, and other critical military targets could still be considered. But every strike must come with clear rules of engagement, collateral damage assessments, aerial refueling plans, combat search and rescue arrangements, and a plan to manage escalation. This is not a Hollywood-style campaign where you strike fast and simply walk away. Meanwhile, a ground invasion of Iranian territory is no longer a realistic option. Iran's vast terrain, strategic depth, high casualty risk, and massive logistics burden would turn a ground campaign into both a political and military gamble.
The biggest debate, therefore, is how to define victory. For the White House, it may be a political exit. For Tehran, it may be proof of Iran's endurance. For Israel, Al-Monitor assessed that Trump's ceasefire put Netanyahu in a difficult position, while giving Iran additional political leverage. The question is no longer whether the United States can declare victory. The more dangerous question is this: after that declaration, who actually controls the pace of the crisis? The end point of this crisis will not be found in a speech in Washington. It will be found in what happens afterward. Does Iran reopen Hormuz? Does Israel accept a halt? And do U.S. forces in the region truly reduce their combat readiness? If President Trump declares victory and then reduces U.S. forces, the White House may ease domestic political pressure. But according to Reuters, Tehran may read that move as evidence that the United States no longer wants to keep paying the price. In that scenario, Iran gains more room to rebuild its missile and nuclear programs, and to restore military capabilities damaged by airstrikes. The second scenario is that the United States declares victory but maintains a large military presence in the Middle East. That approach preserves deterrence, but it does not solve the root problem. Hormuz remains a choke point. Diplomacy remains deadlocked, and Iran still holds leverage over global energy prices. The third scenario is that negotiations fail, forcing the United States to return to limited strikes in order to reapply pressure. But according to Reuters, a ground attack is now considered far less likely.
That shows Washington still wants to preserve the right to escalate, but does not want to get trapped in a larger war. So the final question is not who declares victory first. The real question is who controls the day after the war. The United States may control the message. Iran may control Hormuz. Israel may continue applying pressure. And the oil market may become the clearest place where the new balance of power is exposed. So what do you think? Is Washington avoiding a quagmire, or is it allowing Iran to win the war of wills? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.